All right, so I should be starting this recording here, and I will share out my screen, and I should have my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll enlarge that. So today is August 15th. It is not only the anniversary of India's independence, but at this date last year, I actually put in my 2-week notice to resign from my job, and also 40 years of working and retired. So now I'm coming up on 1 year of retirement, working on interesting stuff like writing this book and giving these kind of quarterly YouTube presentations to give an update on everything. I'm actually posting this PowerPoint at my Google Drive, and also I will share out the recording of this too. Since I presented this a few months ago, um, made a few updates. So obviously, if you look at the lower right, the book I'm writing about Indian history, it comes from my perspective growing up in America. So it's an outsider or etic perspective. And 99% of the people who write about Indian history are insiders or emic. So I do think I have something to offer. It's a different perspective. In my retirement, it's like I said, it's coming up on a year now. I'm keeping myself very busy. So in addition to writing the book, I'm also reading quite a bit. So if you look at the right side, that whole book stack, I mean, I go through maybe a few hundred books a year. So I'm enjoying reading a lot. That's part of the reason why my writing of the book is slightly delayed because I keep picking up more information. There's a lot of good stuff out there. I'm also exercising. I got a personal trainer. Doing my boating. I'm in Freedom Boat Club, so I'm doing a lot of that, taking a lot of guests. And I'm working on Lego, which is something I really enjoy, building some Lego sets, particularly the Star Wars and some of the larger ones. I used to play with Lego when I was young, and here I am old, and I'm getting back into it. And then, of course, also doing my work at the Lighthouse Volunteer. And in addition to all of this, of course, we're traveling and enjoying my retirement. At our museum in Pune, we have made some updates. We've been donating a lot of money, and they put a plaque there, if you look in the center of the slide, for me and Nina for not just the money, but the ideas we given them, like cleaning up the whole front and improving the parking, making a nice entrance. And I asked the owner manager there, Francois, to do a few things. So he has, and those things you can see on the lower right that have been posted online. So a drone video and a tour. Um, all of my 50 panels in my pavilion there are also posted online. And Francois himself walking through my pavilion, describing some of my panels. That video was also posted online. In the past few months, I've read a few books about Indian history, and I just wanted to give a few comments here. I'm going to include this information in my book, but two books come to mind: The History and Chronology of India, Undoing Distortions of Colonial Rule by Anil Mehta. And the other one I read recently was Lost Kingdoms of the Vedic Age, From Rigveda to the Buddha by Ashwin Mehra. Now, both books have fantastic information, but their perspective is different than mine, and I disagree with their chronology, both of them. In the case of this book, the chronology is too far back. They're going to 7,000 BC, and yet they're not even mentioning the Dasharajna or its chronology, barely any mention of Ramayana or its historicity. Um, the perspective here, the focus here seems to be very much like anti-colonial. So it's like the British said this, and therefore we think this. The British said that, and they think that. But I don't think that's the right way to go through history. You should just look at the data and let the truth flow from the data versus trying to disagree with everything that others say, because some of the stuff they said might have been right, but I'm not going to disagree with it just because it came out of their mouth. Um, uses a lot of astronomical evidence, which I'm not a big fan of because everything in space goes in cycles, so it's possible to be way off with that, versus archaeological evidence, which is going to get you a much tighter range. And then also he uses terms like sheet anchors, which I'm not a fan of. I'm really prefer to look at the continuity of history, not just individual points. When did this event occur? When did that event occur? That's not as important as, what happened before, during, after, and how does that fit in with something else, and where's the synchronicities, and where's the differences, where are the conflicts. That's, I think, a better way to piece together the history. The focus of this book is primarily post Mahabharata, which is kind of interesting. How can you put a history of India and kind of skip over or not really emphasized the Vedic area, which is a huge chunk of India's history, maybe almost half. And and as a result, I'm looking for kind of reference or perspective on that period, highlighting some of the things that were covered by Srikant Talageri, not a mention. So I think that's a big lacuna. It's a big hole. In any event, there's an interview of this author online on YouTube. It's good work. Details of it I like, but the overall chronology I disagree with. Now, this book has a fantastic historical analysis, talks about how to piece together history from its some components and how to look at genealogy and to synchronize different genealogies together, like two different kings fought together in a war, or someone married someone else, or somebody was somebody's cousin, or they lived together at the same time. These are great ways to synchronize um, different chronologies, not just of kings, but also their purohits, their priests. So that analysis he did, fantastic. He does mention a few things like Indo-Aryan language. I'm not sure if he's like really aware of the Indus script decipherment of Yajnadevam, some of that great work that's been done in the last few years. He does mention Dasharajnya, but and he does focus on the King's List versus astronomy. Great there. I would like to have seen a little bit more continuous King's List and not just kind of bits and pieces and maybe some maps, but that's okay overall. Um, the book has a good flow, but then at the end when he kind of summarizes, it says, I've talked to you about relative chronology. Now here's my absolute chronology, and then he gives his time frames, which were completely crunched down. I mean, if this one went and provided a chronology that's way too far and unrealistic, this one crunches it down to the stage of ridiculousness. I think he's starts around 2000 BC and puts the uh, events of Ramayana at the same time as Dasharajna, which is just bizarre. So everything from 4 or 5000 BC to 2000 BC is completely missing. Um, so I don't agree with the chronology at all, but interesting analysis work, though. That part I do like. Okay, I'm going to fast forward now all the way to the end of the presentation because I haven't made any updates, any changes to the slides in the middle here, but starting about here. I had mentioned this when I gave a presentation to a group of people some months ago, and I still keep seeing this come up. You watch the news, and people will highlight some facts which may be correct, but then they'll come to a conclusion which is unrelated. And somehow they just gloss over that. So, for example, one thing you'll see a lot these days is people will point out that, we have more income equality than ever. And therefore, we need Marxism. What? But people draw this conclusion, so you'll see these type of things all the time. Just, I'm not telling you what to think, I'm just asking you to think and keep your eyes open for this stuff because this affects not just understanding of world history, but just how to think in general. And along those lines, here's some top most popular logical fallacies. I would say straw man and red herring are really common. You'll hear people use this all the time, right? They'll bring up straw man arguments or they'll point out a red herring. And if the audience is untrained in these techniques, then the person saying this will sound reasonable, and you might find yourself siding with them and not realize that you've bought into a completely false analysis just because they used this kind of logical game. This slide, I haven't made any changes since the last few months, but I do feel that, and maybe I should speak to some others about this. I really think we need to change our terminology globally. We keep using this word Caucasian. They're white, they're Caucasian. But a race is not the same thing as a complexion. If you look at Negroes, blacks, the range of complexion is vast. If you look at Orientals or East Asian, what we call Mongoloid, the range of complexion is vast. Likewise, for what we used to call Caucasian, it varies from white to brown. I really feel we should change that to Indic because I think that genetic data shows that when the humans from or humanoids from Africa migrated to through what is today the Middle East to India, and then over a period of like 50,000 years, they evolved into what we call the Caucasian race. I think it's more apt to call it Indic race because then from India it spread out in all directions. And as people went to climates with less solar radiation, they lost some complexion. So I think once again, the race and skin complexion are two separate things, and a more technically, historically correct term would be Indic. Caucasian kind of implies a white Aryan race from Caucasus Mountains, which is completely disproven. And why should we repeat something that we know now is incorrect? Um, I saw this some time back. I thought it's nice to point out. People may be aware of this, but it's interesting to note that there's some good evidence that Indians were in the Persian army that then was fighting in Greece, and that was about 480 BC. In addition, we have Indians who visited ancient Egypt, and there's actually, graffiti um, from Indians, 400 or 500 BC. So it's good to know that there was some cross-fertilization of peoples in the ancient period. This is one thing I'm very happy to see. I've noticed over the last 6 months, maybe a year, people are starting to pay attention to the Dasharajanya of War of Ten Kings, which is the war that was a series of battles that were described in the Rig Veda. This is great because unless people understand this, they're really not going to understand Indian history. They'll have this fantasy, mythological concept of Indian history. Like, in other words, they'll think of everything from the Buddha to today as being historical. Though, if you go one step back into Mahabharata, it's fairly historical. But beyond that, it's all foggy, which means that the Ramayana is pure mythology, but there's actually a real historical event there, but it's not presented as history. It's always presented as fantasy. And before the Ramayana is a Dasharajanya. That's not even presented. That's completely forgotten. So we need to bring back the history. Dasharajanya 1, Ramayana 2, Mahabharata 3. These are the three epics, or what I like to call the epic trilogy. This is my terminology. If we understand what they were and that they were historical, then of course mythology builds and layers on top of that, but the actual historical events are there. It's very interesting. Right now in movie theaters, we have the Odyssey, which is a retake or spin on the historical Greek epic, the Odyssey, right? The Iliad and the Odyssey. We know that those were historical events, and we know that there's a real history there. We have a rough chronology of all that, like 1200, 1100 BC. But people can then put mythology and put layers on top of it, and that's fine. But just understand that there was some history to begin with. Well, with India, I think people have mythologized so much they've forgotten, or they don't even recognize, or they don't even believe that there was an original history. No, there was a history, and we actually have quite a bit of data, and that's some of the things I'm going to write about in my book. If you look at this icon in the top left here, somebody took my work on Dasharajanya and put an article up at Sanskrit magazine, put all of my information at the bottom, put Neeraj Mohanka. They never asked me, they just put it up there. But I'm totally happy with it because I'm just glad that it puts more emphasis on Dasharajanya. And here you can see other random stuff I found on the internet, including my good friend Conrad Els. So, over the last year plus, there's been, more attention on this Battle of Ten Kings, Dasharajanya battle, Dasharajanya war, what I like to call epic number one. I think it's a very good thing. One of the areas that more work is needed on, I'm going to try to include a little bit of this in my upcoming book, is maps. Knowing what happened when is nice, but it'd be nice to know where what happened. And that where should be from two different perspectives. There's the insider perspective looking out, and there's the outsider perspective looking in. So we have plenty of kind of the European perspective of what Europe looked like and the European perspective of what the world map looked like. What we don't have enough is other civilizations' perspectives. So I'm going to be including a little bit of information from India. I believe the most ancient maps from India are around 500 BC of India, about India, and from Indians, what they considered or what they viewed a map of the world look like. I think it's good to see different perspectives. Interesting thing, we're discovering people in India are digging finally. I've been saying this for 30, 40 years. Keep digging. There's a huge, massive population in India going back thousands of years. If they dig further, they will find more history. So Somebody was digging underneath Jagannath Temple in Puri, and they found a huge tunnel that goes from the temple in the direction of the ocean. What they'll find there, I'm not sure, but they started digging. They found some interesting things there. This is a story that I've told people verbally, and I decided, I'm going to include a slide in my presentation about this. And I guess this is the importance of technology. I was invited to give a talk on ancient and medieval Indian weapons at a place which doesn't exist anymore. It used to be called Higgins Armory in Worcester, Mass. I used to live in Massachusetts for, 26 years. This armory kept so much, you know, uh, kind of knight's armor and chainmail and other type of weapons, mostly medieval, but this was kind of a traveling exhibition of different cultures. So they were focusing on India. So they called me in and I went and I gave a talk. I actually had a nice opportunity to meet Dr. Rafiq Mughal, who's done great work on um, history of Pakistan, the Cholistan Desert, which is what they call the Thar Desert on their side of the border. It's the exact same thing. And I asked him, did you see any discontinuity in the archaeology there from like 10,000 BC to today? And he said, no, no discontinuity. In other words, all the Syrian invasion stuff is a complete fabrication. There's a continuity of people, cultures, pottery. Everybody knows this who study the actual, um, you know, physical evidence. In any event, the woman who was the curator of these weapons, I was talking to her about weaponry and technology, and she was kind of giggling as she was pointing out a few of the Indian weapons, and she was saying that some of the Indian weapons in the 1400s were as advanced or less advanced than stuff that was outdated in Europe and the Middle East in the 1200s. So, in other words, India was behind like 200 years at least technologically in weapons. And if they were that far behind technologically in weapons, were they also behind in military strategy or techniques? Possibly. So I think this is a big hole in Indian thinking that they didn't have people go all over the world and learn what everybody's doing from a military strategy point of view. I mean, both overt and covert, right? Just the regular trade missions, but also spies. Understand what everyone's doing, learn about the different technology, because anybody who's a student of world history will tell you, you get behind technologically, you're going to lose. You're going to lose 100% of the time. A 10% advantage in technology could represent a 100% victory on the battlefield. So that was interesting, and that was kind of an eye opener. And there's a few links down there to find out more information about that. A few of the things I've mentioned to people verbally in the past, I've decided I'm going to include a couple slides here, and I'll talk about this briefly in my book. Maybe I'll put it in appendix. And that is some topics which people maybe don't think about that much, or maybe they consider it once again like fantasy or not real, but it is real, and it's so real that the U.S. government is now releasing all this data about UFOs and UAPs. In other words, we humans on this planet are not alone. We've never been alone, especially since World War II or a bit before World War II. The major powers, U.S., Germany, Russia, now China and India are aware that we're not alone and that there's been an interchange of technology. And so it's important to understand these things. There is certain technologies which are considered not real, but which exist and have been worked on for decades, such as anti-gravity, potentially free energy, other things. And supposedly some of these technologies are going to be released bit by bit. Um, I do know that this particular triangle aircraft, the TR-3B, which once again is not considered real, but it's absolutely real, and I've personally seen some evidence of it. This type of stuff all goes under the category sometimes of SSP or secret space program. The reason why I bring this up is, we talk about Indian history, we talk about world history. We need to, move up to 30,000 feet or, even higher the to get a broader perspective to understand, what really is the history of this planet, how Bharat, how India fits into that. Sometimes people's perspective is way too narrow. They just think within themselves and they don't understand what's going on outside of that. And by outside, I don't just mean other countries. I mean, uh, we're not alone. There's a lot out there. It's a big universe, right? So this is just a summary of some SSP information. If you're interested, you can go study it on your own. A lot of this is, Wikipedia, public information. There are shows, conferences. I go to them. I meet people. I know people doing things. The things they do are classified or semi-classified. You're not going to hear about this ever in the mainstream media. Although I would say that the mainstream media in the past year or two has started to leak out slowly things about, hey, maybe UFOs are real. Hey, the government's starting to release some data. So they're leaking it, they're giving it in drips to the public. I think they're doing that because the public just can't handle the real truth. So they're just, little bits and pieces are coming out. At the bottom here in red, you'll see some words you may have heard here or there, like QAnon, 17, all these things, bunch of other words. You can go research that on your own. But once again, all of this kind of ties into uh, alternative history, alternative news. Sometimes people call this alternative reality. You can look this if you're interested. And that is about it for the updates that I wanted to give at this time. Right now, my big project is I have the pieces of my outline for the book done, and now I'm starting to learn how to use some AI tools and to bring this whole thing together. So I'm gonna, instead of just slowly word for word writing out the whole book, I'm gonna take the pieces I have and use AI and see what it does, and then go back and edit, edit, edit. And so maybe in a couple months I'll give a presentation, and my book will be mostly done, at least the draft of it. And AI could help make this job go faster than just manually writing. I'll find out. Thank you.